if I may, in English. Raise your hand if you're entrepreneurs, investors, corporates. Okay, great. Any government? Okay. Start? Okay, wonderful. Oh, hi.
Good afternoon for everyone. Let me introduce our next speaker, Andrew Robbins, the general partner of Rubicon Venture Capital. He brings for us the spirit of the Silicon Valley entrepreneurship and the venture capital tools. And let's begin.
Okay, great. Yeah, so my name is Andrew Romans, and I'm a general partner at Rubicon Venture Capital. This slide tries to attempt to make New York City and San Francisco look like one city. So we flew over the middle that elected Trump, so it's not our fault, just to start there. But today I'm going to talk a little bit about corporate venture capital and try and localize some of this thinking to Ukraine. Just a quick background on myself. I've always been an entrepreneur. I had businesses in high school and in college, and then later had investors. And so I've raised over $100 million for companies that I started myself. So that's a lot of meetings with venture capitalists to get the money and in working with them to try to make these companies successful. I had one IPO, one solid M&A where I sold the business, and then I've had a few failures, and I've even lost a lot of money and tried to learn from what went wrong. And then to kind of speed through a lot of it, I started Rubicon Venture Capital with one of my best friends, where the business is we raise money from other people, like individual rich people, high net worth individuals, family offices that are so rich that they have a team of people working for them, and then large corporations, actually, which fits with some of the research on corporate venture capital, and then just straight up institutional investors looking to make a financial return. I'll talk a little bit later about our business, but let's get into the corporate VC stuff. So actually, Huawei, the big Chinese company, I was originally a telecom entrepreneur. So, I hate it when someone doesn't speak into the mic. I don't know if I have to lean forward. But Huawei asked me to advise them on forming their corporate venture capital group. And so when I say CVC, that means corporate venture capital. So that's like Intel Capital or Microsoft Ventures, IBM Ventures, which is a little different than Rubicon Venture Capital, where we're literally just trying to make money. We're not trying to sell CPUs of Intel or whatever the business is of Cisco. But I said to Huawei, okay, I can help you. What I'll do is I'll interview the top 20 CVCs, who I already know. I know all of them. And I'll ask them specifically, how do you structure it? What's your investment committee? Do you need a signature from the CFO of your $40 billion company to write a check for $500,000, which might sound really difficult to get the guy to move fast? Do you need to get a business unit within the company to do business with the startup before you can complete the investment? Like, how good is it? How bad is it? How do you compensate the team to stop them from quitting their jobs? And I asked them all of these questions, and then I asked them, how would you do it differently if you were the king of France and had more power to do this better? And I then put about 50 interviews into this book, which I gave my copy to Luda, so she's got a copy of the book right here. And I interviewed over 100, actually, and I wasn't in a rush to get the book out. I actually enjoyed letting this process go on for like 2 years as I started meeting people that I did not know, like people from, Total Ventures and Chevron, Exxon, asking to meet me. And I thought, why not? Maybe I'll sell my company to them one day. Maybe they'll invest in my fund. Maybe they'll co-invest with me into my startups and become customers of my portfolio. So, and I wrote this book. I guess I don't know if you can understand the Russian on the right, but that book, my first book, came out in a couple languages, and this book should be published. The translator's had a hard year, and so he's what's slowing it down. But Alpina is publishing the new one too. Oops. And I'm working on a third book, which I'm taking my time on, which is really focused on raising money. It's incredibly important topic to me. The number one cause of death for a startup is running out of cash. That might sound very obvious, but it never surprises me that these CEOs just expect that the existing investors will keep sending them money, when in fact you really probably need someone new to put more money into your company. So it's extremely important to always make a list of people to target to put more money in your startup and keep it until you can get it to profitability or high growth or outfund your competitors and stuff. So it's a big topic. But the big picture is there's something in this for the large corporation, there's something in this for the startup, and there's something in it for the financial investors just trying to make a financial return. For the big companies, there's a huge list of things. In fact, it's so important that, I don't care about making money from the book. So like on my blog, if you go to rubicon.vc and click on the blog, you can get chapter 1 for free, where I list all the reasons that CVCs told me the answer to the question, why do you do this? If you are a $50 billion company, what's the point of investing $50 million and making $200 million back? The big thing is that in the old days, in the ancient times of like the 1980s, in order to make innovation, you needed a big, expensive computer to play with. You needed like TJ Watt's IBM or Hewlett Packard, and these kind of guys were making innovation. Only 5% of the patents were happening outside of large corporates. This has completely changed. Now, it's very cheap to launch a startup. What really took $5 million to take an idea to put it into the market really costs like $500,000 now. There's a lot of reasons for that, but just trust me, it got cheap to launch a startup. And also, I think there's been a proliferation in the United States, France, UK, Scandinavia, Germany, of a lot of venture capital and angel investing. So it's now cheap to get going. There's more of like Germans normally are risk averse. Now Germans realize this is actually a good opportunity to make money. And so there's just more startups now than ever before. In Japan, if you graduate from the top university, your number one choice is to like work for the government. And if that doesn't work out, you want to work for a large corporation. When I was young, people wanted to work for Goldman Sachs, investment banking, McKinsey, Accenture, large corporates, or IBM, where now nobody wants to do that. People are like, well, if it doesn't work out, then I'll do that. What I really want to do is be Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs. So it's really, it's getting more of the human capital than ever going into startups. So if nothing else, a large corporation should pay attention to what's happening in the startup world just to access that human capital that no longer wants to work for the big company. And there's dynamic companies like Google and Amazon that are born entrepreneurs themselves that completely tap into this human capital. And there's sort of some 200-year-old Japanese companies that are trying to figure out how to do it. But for the corporate, some big ideas are just simply reach outside of the company, grab some startup innovation, and bring it into the inside. So the number of patents happening in startup world went from 5% to 30%. That number's probably not even accurate anymore. It's probably like getting close to 50. It'll eventually be 80. So that's one thing. When I was advising Huawei, they take 10% of last year's top-line revenue as their budget for next year's R&D, research and development. So when I started advising Huawei, they had $56 billion of revenue. So that means they were spending $5.6 billion in a 12-month period with engineers generally sitting in cubicles in Shenzhen. And these are not Mark Zuckerberg's or Steve Jobs. So what are they going to do other than copy and reverse engineer stuff? Their smartphone is not going to be as good as the iPhone if they're just spending the $5.6 billion, and with the China Development Bank giving them unfair advantages, in their huge home market and everything else, their revenues are going to $100 billion. So the $5.6 billion budget is quickly becoming $10 billion for every 12 months. So I was like, come on, guys. What you should do is what Cisco did. You copied everything else from Cisco but the CVC program. I told Cisco, I'm advising Huawei, do you mind if I give them a case study? They're like, yeah, whatever, we don't care. So they told me everything, and I shared that with them. But a company like Huawei should absolutely put money into venture capital funds that have a good brand, that get access to all the deal flow, and they will benefit from getting business intelligence, understanding what this artificial intelligence and machine learning and big data science is in dynamic software that learns from itself, that's replacing humans. Ultimately, China has benefited from a low-cost labor, right? Like, it costs less money to pay someone from the countryside to move into the city and work in a factory than it does for an American. But it's getting more expensive in China, so that low-cost arbitrage opportunity is floating down to India and Vietnam. The factories will leave China if they don't create robots, drones, artificial intelligence, and automate these jobs. And they're doing it, and they're using venture capital to achieve this. So venture capital can be a weapon to achieve strategic diversification of your business. I think that it's great to ride a wave up, like Ericsson did a good job in the mobile phone networks, right? Like, we all have mobile phones, and Ericsson was #1 in wireless modulators. But that's now a declining business. The revenues are actually decreasing. So they said, why don't we try to get into the data center? We'll sell stuff to the YouTubes, the Facebooks, these Amazon Web Services, Hyper Data Center. My career, we began in the mainframe with dumb terminal architecture, and then it switched to client server, Unix, and PCs and servers. And now we're going back to the mainframe, but it's in the cloud, So it's going full circle. But so to tell a quick story, Ericsson, I meet with them regularly. I introduced them to one of my portfolio companies, Node Prime. They invested in the company. Then they became the first significant customer for the company. And they used the operating system of Node Prime for their flagship product in the data center, which they're selling. And it occurred to them that if Cisco buys this company, it'll push them back out of the data center. So they acquired the business, and it'll ultimately become a multi-reoccurring revenue stream of more than $1 billion a year. And it'll help establish them more deeply into the data center, which is exactly the strategy that they wanted. So a simple thing is diversify your revenue streams, your service offerings, your products. And if you think you're going to come up with all the ideas in your cubicle or in your little corner office, that's not the case. There's entrepreneurs out here in Kyiv and everywhere, all over the world, South Africa, Singapore, everywhere, experimenting with things, with funding, and these large corporations should tap into it. So what's in it for the startups? Let's just take Huawei. What's your name in the front of it? Alexi? All right, so imagine, Alexi, that you come up with some mobile wallet for mobile payments. And I invest in your company, and Huawei is an investor in my fund. And before I invest in your company, I reach out to my Chinese colleagues and say, hey, do you have anything like this in Africa? You know, you sell a ton of handsets, you basically lent money to them as debt and then converted it to equity, so they own Africa now. That why don't we do a test and do a trial and put your thing, your mobile payment wallet, on 10,000 handsets. And if that works, it'll be on 600 million handsets within 18 months. If we start, you could basically be bigger than Bank of America and become a bank, you know, not to mention PayPal. You'd kill PayPal. And, but on the other hand, if I invested in your company and we have no real relationship with Huawei, and you tell me that you're getting on an airplane to go to Shenzhen and meet with these guys, I'm like, dude, that's the IT department of the People's Republic Army. I mean, that sounds like a disaster. You're never going to get anything done. They're just going to steal from you, basically. But on this other way, we get them to do the trial and we get them to blow it out. You're going to make so much money, you'll be profitable, and you can IPO the company on a discounted cash flow and stop selling shares to VCs to build your business. So as an entrepreneur, when I had VCs invest in my startups, I basically said, if you don't destroy value, I consider you a good VC. They often were these like ex-bankers and consultants that think they're smart, and they might be smart, but there's something not right, and they tend to squeeze and make mistakes on the company. So I wanted to make a VC fund that truly adds value and helps the entrepreneur in any way we can. One of the flaws of venture capital to me is that the investors in their funds are kind of endowments, pension funds, fund of funds, huge family offices, multifamily offices that do not want to interact with the startups. So the corporate side, we established that they need to have access to the human capital and the ideas and the innovation and bring it into their companies and survive. Whereas these other ones are like, hey man, I'm just investing out of $80 billion fund of the pension fund of the state of Oregon. I don't care about the startups. Just show me that you're making money and I'll keep investing in your new funds. So there's no interaction between the investor LP layer and the startup layer. So the VCs take the money in and they have to hire people to help and deliver value to the startup. With us, and one of the reasons I'm here is that I try to go long airplane rides to other countries and raise money from rich people, you know, family offices that probably own companies, and large corporations that want access to startup innovation. And then when I'm working with the companies, I say, hey, let me introduce you to a guy I know in Indonesia who owns 62,000 auto mechanic shops, and we can sell your little, you know, car device, you know, there. So it's trying to help the startups get revenue, if nothing else. Now, I'm writing a book on funding. I make sure that my companies never run out of money, which is the #1 cause of death. So there's a lot of ways we help, but I believe in the network. The classic VC model, the VC is literally on like 10, he's on the board of directors of 10 companies, and if you get him to tell you the truth, they're on like 30 or 40, and they're trying to get off 20 and join another 10. And during the board meeting, my VCs would walk up and take phone calls. And I'm like, dude, isn't this like the one day I'm supposed to have you here? And we're trying to make some big decisions, you know, but that's just the way it is. So with our model, we actually introduce these very successful entrepreneurs, and some of them are bankers too, that have more experience than I do, and they take the board of directors. So we actually put on kind of parties. We do these rooftop parties in New York, this houseboat thing in London, and then my backyard in Silicon Valley. And we have the entrepreneurs meet with the investors in our fund, and they all just mix and socialize. And then I say to the CEO, hey, which one of these people do you want on your board of directors? Or, you know, they're available to help you, you know, anytime. So that's a little bit of a different model. So I think for me personally, I'm achieving my, you know, life objective is to be helpful to the startup. And part of that is bringing in not just an individual who's got a huge lifetime network in some country, but even large corporations like this Huawei example, which is interesting. The sad truth is that most corporate venture capital firms are structured in a way that makes it a little not so great. Like, one of the key problems with the large corporations is that they're uncomfortable seeing the investment professional make a lot of money. If I were a fund of funds and I invest in your VC fund, so if I invested in your fund, Deborah, and you make $100 million, nothing would make me happier. I'd be like, I'm a winner, and she made a killing, and that's great. When you're the CFO of Huawei, and you've been there for 27 years, and some dude who's only been there for 17 years walks out making $100 million, they're like, we got to stop that. That's just not cool. And so the problem is, the longer an individual stays working at Intel Capital, the more you know that person's not the good one. If they were the good one, they would have somehow broken off that plantation and get paid for their work and be unshackled on the investment committee that requires the CFO to get involved or a business unit to sign off. But some CVCs are good, and they're getting better. I don't think I should get too deep into it, here, but I do get into that very deep with corporates of saying, this is what you do wrong most of the time. If you can fix any of these, great. But the opening quote in the book, and I end with it too, is you can't always get what you want, but you find sometimes you get what you need. And that's the Rolling Stones. And so, this is the way to do it right, but don't expect you can get approval for all that from your corporation. Even if you do it all badly, like the bad ones, it's still a good idea to do it because the benefits that the corporate get are just so fantastic. Let me maybe try to make this more relevant to Ukraine. There's a ton of reasons why a corporate should invest in it. And if they only get one benefit, not even a defensive thing, like your Blockbuster Video renting out DVDs and VHS cassettes and getting disrupted by Netflix, you should see that coming and be able to respond to it. But a big thing is just to drive mergers and acquisitions and your HR department. Look, if you were a California company and you invest in venture capital, like my fund, and then I start getting Ukrainian engineers working for my startups from New York and Silicon Valley, then it might make sense for VMware or Cisco to then acquire one of our startups just to put a flag in Kyiv and start hiring more of these brilliant, educated, beautiful engineers. We have a major lack of engineers. We're going to Canada to get them now. I mean, there's literally, we just can't get enough engineers for the funding and these, entrepreneurial drive. So there's a million reasons for them to do it. The other punchline is it makes money. So back to Huawei with their $5.6 or $10 billion budget, they kind of don't really see the CFO saying, here's $5.6 billion out and showing me the $5.6 billion in. It's kind of hard to touch and measure that. Where with the venture capital, there's no ambiguity. If they say we're going to do $100 million every year for 10 years, make a long-term commitment, do it off the balance sheet, fully owned, and then $100 million goes out year one, invest that into VC funds. Don't go investing directly yet. You'll just make mistakes, and you might lose money, and the program gets canceled. You invest it into VC funds, and immediately you get access to all of their existing historical portfolio companies that those VCs are trying to help. So you'll be sucking in so much technology. It'll be great. Then year two, you should see that companies you met in year one are raising more money, and the ones that you can do strategic business with, that you can resell what they got or you become a customer, if you're going to become a reseller and grow their revenue, like sticking your mobile wallet on all those handsets in Africa, Gordon Gekko in the movie Wall Street would call that a buy signal. That's insider trading information that you go to prison for, like in the movie Wall Street, when they're publicly traded. But this is privately held companies. So it is legal. It's not against the law to make investment decisions based on insider trading information. Do you remember that movie with Charlie Sheen running around in the motorcycle, like getting information and giving it to Gordon Gekko, Michael Douglas, and they're making money, and then they flip it because it's public. So they're out the next day. So, and he does go to prison in the movie. With us, if I connect Node Prime to Albert Kim at Ericsson, and then I see the $5 million thing come through, I'm going to quickly invest more money and double down into that company, making a financial return. So on Ukraine, so what I've discovered, and I didn't have a big respect for it early in my career, but I do now, is the value of the entire ecosystem. It's a bit like being a hippie and understanding the universe and God or something. You got obviously the angel investors and the seed stage VCs, the late stage seed, the accelerators, the demo days, the Series A, the Series B, the Series C, all these people that invest somewhere from earlier up to IPO, that's important. So money is important. There's probably more money within 30 minutes of where I live than the rest of the world combined when it comes to investing in technology companies. And it took a long time. There's no time to get into this as to why that exists, but it does. It's a reality. And if you want to create a Silicon Valley somewhere else, it's really not going to happen. It's a bit like the mayor of Chicago could make an announcement that we're moving Hollywood from Southern California to Chicago. No one believes that's going to happen. That's never going to happen. Hollywood is Hollywood, and Silicon Valley is the Hollywood of the startup universe. Now, it has its disadvantages too, which we can get into, but it's not just the money. The money might be the easiest thing to replicate, actually. I mean, if you got the richest people in this country and the government to just make a ton of money like BPI France has done, or British Business Bank, or the Israelis in the beginning, you could have money, and you could have a different fund for every stage and try and get cool people investing in it. But you know what you still don't have? Oracle, Google, Facebook, Adobe, HP, Amazon, Microsoft. These are the large, big balance sheet companies that buy most of the startups. Now, I had an IPO, but most entrepreneurs do not IPO. The most common positive outcome for a founder of a startup is mergers and acquisitions, M&A, to sell your business to someone who's going to buy it. I believe 82% of all venture-backed startups from Europe that get to the good outcome get acquired by American domiciled buyers. So not surprising with that list of Microsoft and Amazon and everybody, and Google and Facebook and Oracle. There is SAP. So there's one company in Europe that does buy, like it's part of their business model. But most of the big companies here don't buy. And I've been doing like half-day seminars with corporates in Paris and London and all over the place, trying to get the corporates to be like Jeff Bezos from Amazon. But not everyone's born like a Bezos. They're more born just to kind of try and hope and hold your breath that the business they're in will continue to go well. Where Bezos is constantly changing. Like Alibaba's copying him, It's amazing, all the components of that business. So on the ecosystem, there are many other elements like lawyers that have so much deal experience that when you're going through a problem and you talk to that lawyer, the lawyer will say, well, I've seen a similar situation and this is how we got out of it, or I was in a situation and this is how we got killed. And that person is so valuable that's more valuable than the money, So all these different elements, and then the population of entrepreneurs that have been around and failed a couple times or had some success, that is extremely important. So I've only been in Ukraine for a few hours, so I'm the stupidest person in the room when it comes to Ukraine, and I'm trying to get out of the cave and become enlightened. But my understanding is that there's an incredible education, infrastructure and a family infrastructure that, you want your parents to love you, you better get a degree or something. And so people really go to school here. and there's a huge population of engineers, but they seem to be kind of agencies, like a web agency or a software engineering agency that make software for large companies from outside of this country, or they make software for startups that I invest in. And I have invested in startups that have their engineers in Ukraine. And I've not seen any of them hire their engineers full time. And I think that we're probably at a point in history where we should try to take these engineers and match them with VCs that have cash and knowledge that can help them. And then rather than, we'd have to drink vampire blood and live for another 1,000 years before we would have all the elements of the ecosystem, like the big balance sheet buyers that buy the companies, the lawyers, and all those other things. So let's not wait, because we're going to die pretty soon. And so let's do everything we can in our remaining years. So I think the answer is get some VC funds up and running, and we could talk about how to do that, and then hotwire connect these companies to London, New York, and Silicon Valley, and Los Angeles, and help them be like an Israeli mindset. Israeli entrepreneurs don't expect to get rich selling to the domestic Israeli population. Duh. That's pretty obvious. Whereas the Germans and the French and the Brits seem to think like their little 62 million population was good enough. Napoleon never would have been satisfied with that. So they got to think like Israelis. So these companies should be born global from day one. So my vision that I would like to see happen is get the government here in Ukraine to stop letting more time go by, create a sense of urgency, and say, damn it, you screwed it up already from not being 15 years into this. Don't think you're going to wait another 3 quarters to get this up and running. Create a fund of funds, okay, and say, we're going to invest into VC funds that'll invest into Ukrainian-based companies or companies that hire significant population of Ukrainian engineers. And we want to see these companies attack global markets. I could talk about the name Rubicon, but basically I'll say it now. So Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon River in 49 BC. And after all the pharaohs having these coups d'etats from the military in Egypt, the enlightened Romans said, you can't bring your army into the home base. And so and the Rubicon was the border. He broke that rule and said, I'm taking Rome, and I'm bringing an army with it to do it. And I find it kind of inspirational. We can go deeper into it, in other ways. But I think that the Ukrainian startups should be born with an Israeli mindset to attack the U.S. and Chinese market. I think we're in a war with China right now. We called it the Cold War. People don't even call it a war. I would kind of maybe stay away from China for the moment, but definitely attack the U.S. market and definitely go after the Western European market and have an unfair advantage of these awesome entrepreneurs. One of the advantages that we have here in Ukraine is most likely some very stable engineering base. So in Silicon Valley, every startup gets hit with a torpedo and they have problems, and it's a roller coaster. It's up and down. It's often a very young person even running the company with no experience and getting a little crazy. And so your CTO, your chief technical officer, can go out for lunch for like a falafel. And then when you're walking down the street in southern San Francisco, south of Market, there's literally these things that look like a restaurant that say like soup of the day. It says, we just raised $49 million from Kleiner Perkins. We're offering vision and dental for your dog. Like the talent war to hire engineers is brutal right now in San Francisco. And in New York, it's not as bad, but basically it's hard. If your CTO quits, it'll be about 2 weeks before the rest of your team starts to go to that same startup. And that's a problem. If we can get some cool companies that are really growing fast and raising capital, connected to the ecosystems, and they're no longer like, just getting paid with their boss making a spread of how much they bill them out at some agency, but they really have the stock options and equity, and then then one guy's still at the agency, and his roommate all of a sudden makes like $300,000 when the company gets acquired, and then he follows that CEO into another deal, he's going to be like, I got to get out of this agency and get into a real startup. When they join these startups, they're going to be loyal, and it'll be a much more stable team, and it'll make for some good technology companies. So look, the other thing is, you could try to get the government to force some kind of mandate that the largest companies, corporations, and conglomerates in this country should be forced to get into venture capital to make sure they don't go bankrupt. Like, it's not just about helping us start companies and us getting rich. It's about protecting the GDP that exists today in the country. That if you don't change, you die. It's pretty much a fact. I mean, you could be pretty happy with your oil economy, and then what happens to your economy when oil goes down? Diversification is a basic, simple, important thing. And the companies themselves need to diversify. The other thing is that we're living in an age where software is connected to the internet. So it's like if I were on a quiz show where they're like, what's the population of Kyiv? And I've got an earpiece and someone's looking it up on Google and telling me the answer. That's what software is doing. So it's like connected. And there's sensors on everything, and the software learns from every transaction that it does. And people call it artificial intelligence and deep machine learning and this kind of stuff. But we're investing in companies that every day write a little more software to rip out the human and put in the software. And the software does the job 100 times better than the human, and it makes it faster, cheaper, better user experience. And I'm not worried about Uber drivers being unable to find jobs. We'll find them jobs. And outside of like Kuwait, I don't think we have to pay the population to not work. I think that they can work. And it's, in fact, if anything, there's too much work to do. As the more we replace humans, there's even more work to do. The faster I can do my emails, the more emails I'm somehow getting involved with. But if you ignore the fact that people that work in your large corporation are getting replaced, then your company is definitely going to have a disadvantage against your competitors that are embracing the technological change of AI and ML and all that stuff. So the government should, by law, force corporations with a certain amount of EBITDA profit to put a certain percentage of that into VC. But they should make sure that when they do invest in the VC fund, that VC is sharing information. If they're not getting real information, it's pointless waste of time. I've kind of covered the points that I wanted to make. So if anyone wants to ask a question, think about that now, and I'll wrap up in a second. I don't know. Is anyone here forming a CVC right now? Probably not. Is that? You're not. Oh, you're in the process? All right. Well, we'll get each other's information. We can talk about it. But key things I would say is make a long-term commitment. One of the big mistakes that I've seen is that they launch the CVC, and then 2 years later or 3 years later, they cancel the CVC. The other thing that happens is they don't feel comfortable paying the salary of the people the way we get paid. And so when someone joins the CVC, even before their first day on the job, they're already talking to me about their mutiny plans to make a getaway and get off that plantation and get 2 and 20 structure of compensation. So between the whole thing getting canceled and the people leaving, it's a very short-term thing. And often, there was no long-term commitment. So what should happen is that the corporate makes a 10-year commitment to wire a certain amount of money, budgeted, into an off-balance sheet legal entity. And then that legal entity invests the money, and then hire a team that's 50% insiders with as much power as possible, so you can get the top, C-suite to do stuff with the BUs that have been there forever, that can navigate the corporate. But you've got to get people that have like 30 years of network experience like me. You have, like the number of lunches, late nights I've had with people, You can't replace that overnight. And if you've been at IBM your whole life, you don't have that. So you got to get this hybrid culture, and then go fund of funds first, and then, but make sure that they communicate. Not every VC wants to communicate. They just like the anonymous pension fund investor. So get into the ones that are looking for actually leveraging the partnership, and that they believe in that. And then when you make your first direct investment, make sure the VC's holding your hand through it, because you might get fired for making big mistakes. And in Japan, you might have to kill yourself in the town square, So you want to make sure that the thing is financially profitable so it doesn't get canceled, as well. Compensation, you can't always get what you want, but you might, and I can make any of these slides available. I think you should pay the people or else they will quit. And it's very hard for some reason to see people get rich, but, don't expect them to stay. I mean, I pretend to pay you, you pretend to work. I mean, that's the bad old world. Invest with a portfolio construction. A lot of corporates, they like investing they're doing everything wrong, investing off the balance sheet, and then they invested in like one company because they see some strategic partnership with it. And then when the company goes bankrupt, everyone's like, ooh, this is like the third one to go bankrupt. We're in the J curve. I'm worried I'm gonna get fired. No, you tell everybody from day one, we're gonna invest in 25 companies. This is not voodoo, okay? This is not magic black art. You just invest in 25 deals and expect 8 of them, 8 will go bankrupt. And then you'll have like these 4 ones that are really doing well that you put most of the money into. You put go 10% of whatever you got because you actually know how much money you got to play with because it's in this dedicated pool. And what we do is we invest in 25 deals, late stage seed more or less, and we write a relatively small check, and we're in it with other top VCs. And then as we're getting that Gordon Gekko insider trading information while being viewed to be helping them a lot, we're like, man, that's a buy signal. I'm double down in that one. Our Ukrainian friends are now distributing it, and it's going great. I'm going to put 10%. All chips in is 10%, never more. You go all chips in of 10% into 5, you've now moved 50% of the fund into 5 rockets. Now, a rocket can explode, but then you got 4 that really make it. And people will say, Andrew, how did you know how to pick those 4 winners? I'm like, well, first of all, I picked 5 and I lost everything on that other one. But that's because I was in 25 and we're able to observe what's going on in there and get the real info. So we're going to beat the stock market forever. We might have a bad fund once or twice, but if you keep investing in every one of our funds every 3 years, you'll do better. I mean, there's some people who don't use their brain as much and make a ton of money on skyscrapers. I don't know. Good for them. But that's our model. And so the corporate, amazingly, they'll meet with me and I'll sell them all this, and they're like, no, we're going to do it all the wrong way. And I'm like, all right, well, that's tough. Set the investment committee to be quick. I mean, some deals start on a Monday and are done by Friday. And if the investment committee is too difficult of who needs to sign off on it, the word is going to spread that you guys suck, and you want to have a reputation that people want to hit you on their target list. And how am I doing on time? Anybody? Sometimes I say, you'll just rip me off the stage and I'll give 10 minutes. Okay, and I want to make sure we do questions. But Six minutes? Oh, go. All right, questions?
A couple of search projects in the industry, both for Ukraine and international clients. And you mentioned 50% of the staff should be attracted from well-networked venture capitalists. What's their role in this CVC?
Yeah. Well, first of all, one of the problems is if an external person that you want to hire from the outside, like as per my advice, if they're already doing well at a CVC, at a real VC, they don't want to work at Huawei Ventures or Renault Nissan Ventures. So you really can't get the good talent to join it unless you really say we literally put 700 million euros into this bucket, this limited partnership, and we're really not kidding. You guys get 2% annual of that every year. And you've been out there trying to raise money in these other countries or whatever, and it's going okay, but not that good. So if they really make that offer, they could do it. To answer your question more directly, you should have general partners in a fund. And you want to have 2 or more, and it should be basically 50% of these people that have true ownership in the business that are making the big money should be external, ideally with entrepreneur and VC experience.
Would they fundraise as well, or they are interested solely in just making money out of completely closed fund, say 700 million? Why would anyone wouldn't want to work for this kind of fund? But the hardest part is just the fundraising. Or you mean completely corporate money go to this fund?
Well, a lot of CVCs that are formed want to own 100% of the fund, so that the fund is being responsive to the topics that they want to invest in. It's also a mistake that for some reason, corporates that decide to go down the venture capital path think that we should invest in startups that sell the same products and services that we do. That is like taking the money and putting it back into the cubicle in a box in Shenzhen when this is your external innovation. So you should open your mind up to anything, really. I mean, maybe stay out of healthcare life science, but be open to anything. It's transformational. But we could talk offline, but I think that if you're offering good compensation and you show people that there's real money there, you could probably staff the team with some people that have 20 years plus network and knowledge to be good. But you want to also make sure that the investment committee does not require the CEO's approval or things like that. You want to set the team free to be able to get into deals. Like Salesforce Ventures, Mark Benioff is a bit of a monster in a good way, so his culture proliferates into Salesforce Ventures, but Salesforce Ventures I consider to be tip-top. If you want to go get your MBA, your first choice is going to be Stanford, Harvard, Wharton, INSEAD, LBS, and then your bottom choice is going to be Alabama State, right? When you call yourself Verizon Wireless Ventures, that's Alabama State right away. The second you take money from Verizon Wireless Ventures, you've shut the door to doing business with AT&T, T-Mobile, and Sprint. And it just sounds like, the Soviet Army. It just doesn't sound like the dynamic thing you want, So I think it's important that these CVCs can behave, at least externally looking like financial VCs, and secretly they're out for M&A, but they shouldn't advertise that. And I know I'm eating up a lot of time, but who cares? A lot of CVCs, on their business card, it says head of M&A, head of corporate development, and investments. I mean, a lot of them do it. Cisco, for one, does that. And when I'm trying to capitalize and fund a company and help grow it, and somebody invests in the company who really wants to buy it for the lowest price they can get for it, and I want it to sell for the highest price we can get for it, and so does the founder, the conflict of interest there is pretty in your face.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Maybe after without microphone. Thank you, Andrew, for inspiring speech. My name is Dima. I would like to ask a question regarding your Rubicon VC perspective and your experience. Do you compete with any corporate VC, big ones like Intel Capital, like Google Ventures? If not, how you position yourself? If yes, how do you differentiate?
Okay. All VCs are somehow competing with each other to lead and get into deals, but we also syndicate like crazy, and we also like each other, the ones that we get along with. With Intel Capital, we co-invested with them into Listener, which is a inaudible sound waves that transmits data. It's an incredibly cool company. And I've known Intel like my whole life. I know probably like 30 people that used to work at Intel Capital, and I know about 8 people that are still there. Like everybody leaves, it's hilarious. But Intel keeps offering synthetic carry, which means they get some form of upside for the exits to be paid to the investment professionals. And whenever they have a big exit and they pay that out, they remove it, and then everybody quits. And then after everybody quit, they bring it back again. So they're constantly, the good thing is they don't cancel the program, GV, formerly known as Google Ventures, is so prolific that they're in like a third of our deals. And I've got a really, very long-standing relationship with the corp dev team, and I went to Georgetown University with Dave Sabota, and I know them really well. Google does tours for my Japanese tourist investors and all this stuff. So GV, I consider to be true friends. Intel Capital, true friends, but no one stays there very long. If you get into GV, you probably stay there. GV is hot. Google Ventures. So it's all co-opetition, when it's coming to lead, and you figure out the ones you really get along with. Some VCs will throw me under the bus and not let me get even a slice of the deal, even if I introduced it to them. So those are the ones that I keep my eyes on,
Thank you.
There's another level of competition is that they hire my team. Whenever I hire a young person, after like 2 years, they want to be treated like they're a founder of the fund. And that's hard. And then other VCs like to hire our people, and their bigger funds offer them huge salaries that I'm not willing to counteroffer to keep the team when I know he just thinks he's a prince now, So that's a competition.
Thank you. Maybe one short more question regarding tech perspective. Maybe you have some numbers regarding what percentage of corporate-backed startups and maybe technologies they have developed are actually applied into the infrastructure of the company in some operational activity. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a good sense of that. So of like the 100 interviews I did, a lot of these newly formed CVCs are like, 100% of the time, I get a business unit to do business with the startup that I invested in. And Claudia van Muns, this wonderful woman, she worked for Lou Gerstner at IBM at the end of her 15-year career there. And then she founded IBM Ventures 16 years ago. And so she has power in the organization. She's a rank B after Lou Gerstner, rank A. And she told me, even after I invest in the startup, I've got about a 40% success rate of getting a business unit to do business with one of our portfolio companies. So about 60% of the time, expect nothing to happen. And in fact, it's your job as the entrepreneur and the CEO to beg for intros to all the heads of the BUs, ask to be invited to their offsites, and like get something out of that corporate, because you're putting up with a lot of badness. There's a lot of pain with them that you don't have with us. It's like bad radiation. You better get paid for that cancer, My vision is that if we've got 15 Japanese corporates and like we've got all these corporates as LPs in our fund, we should be able to achieve 100% success rate. Keep in mind, you got the corporate, you get the CVC investment professionals that work there, and they're trying their best to get a BU, a business unit, to do business with their portfolio company and make their reputation so they can get off that plantation and get paid a real salary somewhere else. The business unit heads are like, hey man, I don't work at that CVC. I run this business unit, and damn it, that thing looks like it's got bugs in it, and I might tarnish my reputation. You make one mistake in Japan, and it's over. So I'm not going down for your stupid startup that's got, I took a look at it, they don't even have any customers. You want me to be the first big customer? No. So there's natural, humongous resistance from inside of a corporation, regardless of the enthusiasm, and the, goofy outfit of the CVC dude. Well, cool. Well, my email is here. If anybody wants to get in touch, it's andrew@rubicon.vc. And thank you, everyone, for hosting me in your beautiful city.